Mini episode 1275 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello everyone, welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode 1275. This is FDH Managing Partner Rick Morris here, and specifically today this is an episode of a show within a show here, our FantasyDraftHelp.com Insider, which we like to do from time to time, and specifically we're going to be taking a look at the 2020 NFL season, looking at fantasy football, previewing what lies ahead. We've all got our drafts behind us now, presumably at this point in time, as week one is on the horizon, and the gentleman that we have with us here today, you can catch him on such outlets as SiriusXM and WFAN. We've dipped into WFAN repeatedly in the past. Of course, a good friend, Steve Callis, a regular on the show, an FDH Lounge dignitary, one of our favorite regular guests, Evan Roberts, his partner, Joe Benigno. The one time he was on the show, he and I memorably screamed at each other. That was a lot of fun. And Rick Wolf has been on previously, but we are proud, and I think I'm probably leaving out a couple of names here, but I'm very proud to welcome in and add to that list the one and only Pete McCarthy, who, as I say, you can catch not just there, but also on SiriusXM talking fantasy sports. Pete, it's a pleasure to have you in today. How are you, sir?
Yeah, it's great to be on. I would have loved to hear Benigno's fantasy football advice.
Well, that was not a fantasy football thing per se.
Okay.
What that was specifically was it was a general football discussion, and we also had on the one and only, who I'm sure I don't have to tell you about, Ira from Staten Island, who has become a good friend of our show. So we had both of them on, and supposed to be co-equal time, and Benigno basically hogged the time, yelling at me, because that was what got me mad, because I wanted Ira to have a little bit more mic time, because the grave sin of mentioning, I'm a lifelong resident of America's North Coast, so the Browns are my favorite team, but that the Dolphins are my 1A team. And he started screaming at me for about 10 minutes nonstop about how you can't have two favorite teams. And I said, well, when they play each other, I root for the Browns. And we were just basically screaming at each other. And at that point in time, there was a live video component to the show as well. So I'm told that there were an awful lot of people, upon seeing me get so red in the face, that found that one of the most entertaining things in the history of the old Sports Talk Network. So it's nice to provide a little entertainment where you can, Pete, even if it's unintentional.
But look, if you're a Browns and Dolphins fan, you got to hedge your bet somewhere.
You do indeed, and you do
I'm not
indeed.
saying much as a Jets fan, but
Well, yeah, I mean, look, it's a hard knock life, really, for all three of our franchises here, whether it be my 1A team, or your Jets. And I guess just to start with that note before we get to fantasy football, I will say, in looking at the off season that you guys have had with some of the guys sitting out defensively and some of the various issues that have been had there, you know, there are not many things as a Browns fan that can cause you to say, well, at least we're not those guys. But, I mean, I will say at this point in time, you guys are kind of filling that niche for us, and we do appreciate it.
yeah, well, you guys had to run for a long time there for about 15 years. So, yeah, it goes back and forth, I think, between the Jets and the Browns historically. But, yeah, it's just a miserable offseason, traded Jamal Adams, it became a necessary thing. He basically forced his way out, but you actually develop a star player and somebody that not only plays safety but get after the quarterback a little bit, and then you're sending him out, and yeah, they get 2 first-rounders, but you have to wait so long. I want to find out what Sam Darnold is and who's he throwing to this year. There's not a whole lot of big fantasy guys to be grabbing as part of this Jets offense, besides maybe Le'Veon Bell, because he'll touch the ball a bunch. But yeah, the expectations aren't very high going into this thing.
I can imagine that, and I will say again, I'm somebody that came around on Baker Mayfield, and even after last year, and I think with Stefanski, he's going to be primed for a better year, but all along, man, I wanted Sam Darnold. I thought Sam Darnold was going to be the guy in that draft, and I was fit to be tied when the Browns passed him over, so I still think the Jets have a chance to shine on that one. And you know what? And this is not actually this is not a bad segue to some of the fantasy talk for the season. And I know that it's unfortunately going to be a little COVID heavy here, at least at the outset, as we look at the big picture stuff. Good friend and another one of our regulars, fellow FDH Lounge dignitary Russ Cohen, proprietor of Sportsology, who is a lifelong Jets fan. I'm going to tell you, he was really PO'd about the Adams deal, because here was his perspective on it. And I thought to myself, it's an original perspective, but I really kind of agree with it, because I was trying to sell him on it, and Russ is not a big college football guy, so I'm kind of, like, hey, Russ, you got a hell of a haul for the guy, all things considered. And he said, look, the Jets have struggled to draft when they have fresh film on guys. They're not going to have fresh film on a lot of these guys. And, he told me that, and I got to tell you, Pete, I had nothing.
You better hope they play in spring, and you get a look at everybody before it starts up. But even, as you mentioned, those top players have often opted out of the college football season as it's happening in the SEC, the ACC, and such. So, there's nothing about draft picks for a Jets fan. I mean, I think most people would remember that draft video of, like, all-time Jets draft bust, taking Ken O'Brien over Dan Marino and Jeff Lockman, and everybody's chanting for Warren Sapp, and the Jets take Tom Brady, like, all this miserable draft history. And they had a good run from, when Bill Parcells took over to about 2008 or 9, somewhere in there, and then it's really just been all downhill since. I mean, they have drafted as poorly as any team in the league over the last 6-7 years.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody.
Well, and again, if there's anybody on God's green earth that can sympathize with you, it'd be a Browns fan. I mean, I still have PTSD about the regimes of Eric Mangini and Ray Farmer and a couple of these guys, and just the idiocy that we've lived through here. So there is a real kinship between Browns and Jets fans in that regard, I'm afraid. But as I mentioned, what you guys are looking at with the draft next year, in all likelihood having high picks again, but a little bit of a head-scratcher on what to do with them in terms of if a lot of these guys don't play. That's more of a distant concern for fantasy football and for folks that are in any dynasty leagues or whatever. But for folks playing just this season, obviously there is a whole ton of issues as well in terms of everything that is going to be dealt with, the questions in terms of availability from week to week. You already see some oddities out there, and again, probably a smart move. The Eagles signing Josh McCown, but telling him, hey, stay in Texas, we'll wire you your $12,000 a week or whatever, and that way if we have an outbreak on a team, you can come in fresh. Almost sort of a little bit of what we're seeing here with MLB, with guys being off-site, but that's entire minor league groupings that are off-site to come in at the major league level. So there are going to be questions this year, the likes of which we've really never seen before as far as a fantasy football season goes. And this is one of these deals, too, where I really think it behooves people a lot of years. I always preach patience, that if there's guys that bust out on the waiver wire week 1, week 2, okay, you can start with a few guys here and there, but that's supportive of blowing all your waiver wire picks early on, if they are limited, as they are in a lot of leagues. It would seem like this year more than any other year. Hopefully your league builds in some extra room for it, like my 2 leagues have done. But this is a year, I would think, when you'd really want to have your powder dry in case you got to replace guys for COVID later on.
Yeah, I know. My league, we added a bunch of slots for a potential coronavirus list, which, I mean, look, it's just the reality of what this season might be, and they've done pretty well with the testing, at least with these training camps have played, and there's not as much traveling as there is in a sport like, say, baseball. Now, baseball has done better of late, handling their coronavirus positive tests and trying to make sure it doesn't spread through the teams like it did early on with the Marlins and the Cardinals. So let's hope that there's some lessons that have been learned, and these NFL teams don't have major outbreaks. You don't have to worry as much about guys going out, things of that nature, because look, they're at home. When they go out on the road, they're there for one night. It's a game night. It's not like Clevenger of the Indians and Plesac going out in Chicago, then I don't think you'll have a whole lot of those situations as far as the NFL goes. But, yeah, it's anyone's guess how this will all shake out. You have games postponed and moved around, and then how you shifted your lineup. If that becomes an issue and trying to fill spots, I think these are all going to be possibilities. But I'm fascinated after not having a preseason that you can see, and with reporters being so limited in what they can share or even see while they're covering these things, we're kind of guessing to some degree at the depth charts and what exactly they look like. We're going to have guys that go out and get 20 carries at running back, and you'll be scratching your head like, oh, I didn't expect him to be the main guy because, all this stuff is shaken out without anybody seeing it, and it's just going to be the results flying out at you starting on Thursday night with the Chiefs and Texans.
Absolutely, and one of the phrases that comes to my mind, because this is the show where nothing is off topic, when you look at a season like this, I'm hearing that old Rumsfeld line in my head about known knowns and unknown unknowns. I think we can, a lot of people would agree anyways, myself included. It didn't really apply to the Iraq War because, woulda, coulda, shoulda known that that wasn't going to be a layup. But here, absolutely. This is not a situation where any of us have seen anything like this before because, again, we were, 2 years away from the start of the NFL with the Spanish-American flu, or the Spanish flu outbreak of 1918. I'm juxtaposing my wars and my flu epidemics here. The Spanish flu of 1918. NFL formed in 2020. Haven't had any major epidemics on this level since. So, again, we are just kind of squinting into the horizon here, all of us, and really at the NFL level as well. I think it's important for everybody to remember that as well. I mean, if Roger Goodell tries to tell you he knows what's going to happen, then it just shows once again that he's full of crap. Basically, nobody knows. We know from the projections that we're going to have another spike in the virus this fall. It's going to coincide with flu season. So generally speaking, it is wise to expect that there are going to be more challenges to come, but what they're going to look like, we can make educated guesses here, but I think that's all we can really do.
No, I think that's a fair point, because I was comparing it to, baseball and some of the other sports that are in bubbles at this point, and they haven't had many outbreaks of late, but if, as the medical experts project, we do see a spike in the fall, football will be in a much different situation than some of these other sports as they go into November, December, and beyond. Do it without a bubble, or at least that's what they're trying to do initially. I think if there's anything to learn from baseball, it's that if you have one positive test, and you got to shut the team down for a period of time. And if that means they miss a game, or you have to make it up on the back end, whatever it might be, I mean, I don't think I would write that Super Bowl date and, a magic marker, permanent marker, and say, oh, yeah, this is definitely the day the Super Bowl is going to be played. If you got to move things around, that's going to have to be something that the league and everybody is flexible with. But I do think it would be tougher. Baseball is almost thrown out the window to some degree, and I guess we'll see how it plays out. But, okay, if you don't play 60 games, it'll be okay. Well, I can't imagine an NFL team, if they are shut down for, say, 2 or 3 weeks, baseball team, how do you play 13 games and then make it as a wild card? I don't think it would work as well for the NFL. You got to get 16 games per team, I think, in.
Yeah, and unlike in baseball where they can do all these doubleheaders, even with the Fugazi 7-inning doubleheaders, in football you got to space it at a week in between. Yeah, I mean, imagine if we're all waiting 3 weeks just for a couple teams to finish up their games, what that would do to things. And again, I had said all along, and this is going back to some of the earlier days of summer when we were looking at sports coming back, that any sport that's not looking at doing a bubble, I think, is kidding itself. So all along I've seen landmines in this approach, in MLB's approach. I will agree that, again, after some early problems in MLB, that they have basically made it work. They haven't had to lose as many games to this as we would have thought. I wonder if there is a lesson to be learned by any of these leagues here, because in the case of St. Louis in particular, one thing I was critical about was that, again, this is a thing where it wouldn't necessarily be fair to the Cardinals, but my thing is, with the 60-man rosters, wasn't the whole idea of this thing you can bring up guys wholesale? I mean, in the NFL, I don't know what you would do necessarily here, But, as you pointed out, because of the nature of this schedule, we can't afford to just twiddle our thumbs the way that MLB did with the Cardinals there. Oh, that's okay, just come back whenever you want to. If they got a bunch of guys out, you may have to see a bunch of guys coming in, maybe like during the strike from their UPS job or whatever the case may be. But, these taxi squads, whatever it's going to be, I would think that the NFL is probably going to be more proactive in terms of making sure, okay, it's at least going to be a bunch of guys wearing that team's uniform this week.
Yeah, how do you do that, though? You got to have players separate somewhere. At
Yes.
that point, you might as well have, like, 2 replacement teams just training somewhere totally different, waiting to bring into action as, the Jets one week and the Washington football team the next, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Who
knows?
It's really, it's such an impossible situation for, all these leagues and teams to try to figure it out. And like baseball, changing some of the rules. We got 7 innings, double headers. Nothing's really sacred this year. Right now they're talking about the NCAA tournament. Well, we'll just let everybody in and have this massive thing. I think it's kind of a year for experimentation. It's also a year that whatever the rules are day one could very well change a couple of weeks in if they need to. And, look, it's about being flexible. And I know I've been extremely thankful that sports back, not only professionally, but personally. Like, I finally get to 7 o'clock, and then you get to relax. There's always something on. There's something that I'm accustomed to watching to kind of taking my mind off of things and not watching 24/7 news or whatever it is. So, sports have been such a blessing. I just, you want to see it all work, and you want to see it be there, and think about, having NFL Sundays back, and it won't quite be the same. You're not going to the sports bar and taking in all the games, I suppose, depending on where you live, but at least you do have that, and you have a Sunday you can kick up on the recliner and play your fantasy sports and watch 10 hours of football.
That's true, and I think also too, when it comes to things that are going to be different this year, if you look at the strategy end of things and some things that maybe we can anticipate being the case, I will go back to, and at the risk of breaking my arm, patting myself on the back, when we did our NBA preview here in mid-July, I did say at the time that I thought it was a chance for teams like the Nuggets. I mentioned both Michael Porter Jr. and Ball, that, like, you know what, it just throw stuff at the wall, right? You can weaponize the lack of film on you. And this is a thing here, and one of our regular contributors, Chris Galloway, compared it to college football, where they don't have a preseason week 1. There's not really any film on anybody. There is a chance here where, and in doing our NFL preview, actually, my own Cleveland Browns were a very good case study for analyzing, because on the one hand, there is a lot of angst in this town about, are they picking up the new offense? How's it going? The reporters that are at camp are painting kind of a grim picture of that. By the same token, based on the amount of progress that they can make by week 1, they really have a chance to befuddle Baltimore and then possibly even Cincinnati after that, because, there's still only going to be a limited amount of film until you get a week or 2 or 3 into the season. If they can get to where they're mastering their own offense and the other team doesn't have film on them, that is going to give them a tremendous advantage. You look at the experimentation that's happened in the NBA bubble, and I wonder, I'll bet you that has really the success of it in a lot of ways. I think the NFL coaches have probably taken note of that and thought, strategically, maybe we can make some of the lack of familiarity work for us in terms of other teams not having any film on us.
Yeah, let Odell Beckham Jr. throw some passes.
That's right.
And bust out this place, because I think, look, one thing you can expect, and this is always the case, but you have to think it's going to be far more so this year, the offenses are going to look bad these first few weeks. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we go through this every year in the NFL. We get, 6 weeks into the year, and it's, what is the quality of play? It's dropped so much, and because you come off of watching the playoffs and the best teams, okay, and then there's the long stuff, the long off season, but then when you pick it up, nothing looks right. Nothing is smooth. It takes a long time for quarterbacks, receivers, offensive line, for everybody to gel and to get on the same page. And, they don't get enough reps in the preseason. Now they've gotten no reps in the preseason. They're going against the same defense every day. You don't even have the practices against other teams. So I just think that you're going to see some ugly football. You're going to see some disjointed offenses, especially teams that have new coordinators, that are learning new things, that have a new quarterback, that have a lot of new offensive linemen, or even to some degree the skill position players. All of that is going to be a big factor here, especially in the early going. And I think, more than just week 1 and 2, I think you're going to be looking through week 6. Some offenses really having a hard time getting going. So, what are some cheap things you could do? Yeah, look to those gadget plays. Look to the most athletic guy on your roster and throw him out. Like even a defensive player, like a Deion Sanders type, right? I mean, you got to be creative in terms of, getting the ball downfield if you're one of these teams that isn't going to have a fully functioning offense right off the bat. I think that's probably more than half the league can expect to walk in here and really have a lot of things working against them in the early going just because they have something new as part of their offense.
Absolutely. And one of the other things I think that we're looking at here, you touched on it with the lack of the practices in the off season coming into training camp at least. The players all, we heard all these stories about all the workouts that everybody was doing, and a lot of us saw the videos on Twitter of things like Myles Garrett jumping about 10 feet up into the air. And so there were some individual cases where it's like, okay, you could tell that they're really on it. But my aforementioned contributor, Chris Galloway, had said earlier, I hate to say this, but I think you're going to be seeing a lot of soft tissue injuries and a lot of things like that. And you look at how it's played out subsequently here, some of these injuries that have happened right before the season, some of the bad ones, Von Miller, some of these other cases here. So, you look at him, and he's not anybody that you would consider to be particularly injury-prone throughout the course of his career. But methinks if there are players that you have on your roster that have any type of vulnerability, because we do know that for certain players, the term injury-prone is a thing. I still have some PTSD flashbacks about Lawyer Tillman playing for the Browns. So, that can be a real thing. And I would think particularly in a year like this, that might loom even a little bit larger than usual if players are not able to go through their complete and total fitness regime heading into the season.
We've seen it in baseball. In baseball, you've had tons of soft tissue injuries and guys going down. It's not just the pitchers. That wouldn't really be much of a comparison, but the position players, you've seen a lot of this. And it's like half the Yankee roster has gone down at some point with one of these injuries. So absolutely, you can expect that to be a factor, and it's another reason why you're going to want to make, I think, like 6 moves after week 1. And if you are limited in how many waiver wire moves you can make, you might be better served trying to be patient. And even if you have some dead spots in your roster for a week or two, let it phase out. Let everybody else waste all their moves. And then late in the season, playoffs, you'll be the one who can still maneuver and try to make some things happen, because then you're going to have a whole other set of problems, as we talked about earlier, if the virus becomes more of an issue later on in the fall and later in the season and playoff time, and you need to have your moves then. So, patience might help you out a little bit, even as, again, we're learning new things over the first couple of weeks here where guys are in roles that you didn't expect, and you're going to have these soft tissue injuries as part of it, too. It's going to be chaotic. The whole thing's going to be chaotic. But, even if you're not happy with your draft, I'll say that right now, there is going to be a lot of opportunity for you to still win your league and make some of these big moves as the season goes along here.
There is going to be, and again, I will say, chaotic, you put your finger on it. That's the best word that can be used for what we're about to see here, because as I said before, we've never seen a football season like this, which obviously is going to dribble down to we've never seen a fantasy football season like this. So basically anything that we're saying within the confines of the 2020 season is everything has the proviso of all things being equal on this. The landscape as we see it now heading into the season, and just in more of a conventional kind of point of view, some of the notes that we have made previously with FantasyDraftHelp.com and looking at this is that to us there's always a number of guys at every position that we feel are not subject to matchups on a given week. Generally, anybody you spend a first or a second round pick on, maybe even a third, if you spend it wisely, these are not the guys that would be subject to matchups. But at quarterback in particular, you're looking at a situation here where you've got Jackson and Mahomes who really kind of lord above everybody else at the position here, and the depth of the position from there, the number of guys that can be expected to go out and get 4,000 plus yards, potentially 40 plus touchdowns. It's a deep list of guys here, so I would say beyond the top two, to me, quarterback looks like more of a matchup type position than in years past.
Yeah, I would be looking at matchups, and early on in the season, I would be looking for continuity as well.
Yes.
If you have a quarterback that, if Mahomes is that much more valuable now, I would say that he could walk in, same offense, similar personnel, coaching staff. You don't have big changes there as part of things. Where, maybe if you go a little bit further down, I'll bring up Sam Darnold for one. He doesn't have weapons. There's a lot of problems with the Jets. They have a totally different offensive line that they have to put together, but at the very least, the offensive coordinator, the head coach, that has remained the same. Most of the pieces around him have remained the same. So, while Darnold's not going to be a big fantasy contributor for you, and he's got the Bills in week one, which is difficult, at least you can, I think, see an offense like that have more success than maybe is expected early on in the year, whereas, some of these other situations, like, everybody wants to jump on the Bucs, right? Because you look at all the great weapons. They have a terrific offensive head coach, Bruce Arians. They have Tom Brady in a totally different environment. And while they did practice, and he was able to work out with teammates, before the teams were able to get together, like, there's going to be an unfamiliarity. And as terrific as Tom Brady can be, he's in a new offense for the first time in 20-something years. So,
yeah.
There's a lot of change there, and you don't get the on-field reps to work on stuff. So I wouldn't feel great about Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. Not the way that people are jumping on this team, like the Bucs are just going to walk out and score 40 points week one the first time on the field together. I think that kind of expectation is just too far beyond.
I would agree with that. Yeah, continuity is going to loom very large. And as you say, particularly early in the season, because, again, coming in, like I said, if you get to a point where you've learned your playbook early on, if the team can gel early on, then you could maybe have a little bit of an edge because you can be ahead of the other team in terms of them not being able to anticipate you. But as I said with the Browns, first you must grasp your new playbook. First you must all get on the same page. And you can't really accomplish everything, or really anything, until that happens. It's a situation here, too, where at running back and wide receiver, and this has really been the case, I think, the last couple of years, where the depth at wide receiver at the top end is more so than what's there at running back, it seems like. And part of that is because, again, for the last 15 years or so, you've really sort of had the death of the bell cow in the NFL as that role has sort of diversified, as number two running backs have become more and more prominent. And actually, the aforementioned Browns are the best example of that, where Kareem Hunt in certain leagues might be worthy of being a starter in certain types of formats here, even though he's not technically a starter on the Browns. Now, that's a rare situation where that would be the case. But at wide receiver, and particularly with what's happened the last couple of years, with some very good draft classes, another very good one this year, headlined by Jerry Jeudy, even if he wasn't the first guy to go overall at wide receiver. You've got a talent pool there where I would think more often than not, if you're looking at a flex position, unless you've drafted your roster in sort of an unusual type way, you might be prone to be able to take advantage of the depth at wide receiver.
I will say this, I wouldn't touch a rookie receiver this year, and I know
It'd be
a lot
tough.
of people already did their drafts, but that is one of the toughest positions to come in and have success as a rookie, right? I mean, there are guys that have done it. You can point to Randy Moss, Odell Beckham Jr.'s first year with the Giants, but there are not a lot of receivers that walk into the league and become 1,000-yard guys. And then, again, like everything else, you're not getting the reps you're getting in the past. You didn't get a preseason games to kind of get the jitters out a little bit and like, okay, I'm up against NFL players. This is the speed of the game. This is what I have to be accustomed to. You don't get any of that, and you're just being thrust in. So I think it's going to be a tough year for those rookie receivers, regardless of talent, just because of the circumstances. But running backs, those guys, they plug and play. I mean, that just seems to me, rookie running backs walk in. It's an instinctual position. You know how to break tackles, and the runs are all that different from what you did in college typically. So that's what you have. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, first-round pick, and nobody's really sweating what he's going to be able to do in this Chiefs offense, even if you haven't seen a whole lot of them in a Chiefs uniform to this point. But those rookie receivers, I think it's going to be very tough on them. Hey, just talking big, if you want to target others, I think rookie cornerbacks. If you could pick on a rookie cornerback somewhere, I would jump all over that if you have that kind of matchup and can see that your receiver is going to be lined up with someone like that. Because again, it's really tough on the outer edges you get burned when you mess up, when you lose a step, and we've seen it throughout the years. Again, not a lot of players coming in, receiver, cornerback, and have big time success comes back.
One thing that was posited to me by one of our FBH Lounge dignitaries, Ben Chu, this is an interesting theory, is that rookie wide receivers, the one thing they won't have to deal with this year is hostile crowds, that the NFL game day experience, it might be a little bit eerie, it might be a little bit spooky with how quiet it's going to be, but at least the atmospherics of it won't be a little bit, it won't be, if it was something that could have potentially rattled you, it won't be there. Although then again, it might seem a little bit eerie, the fact that it's going to be quieter than that. There will be tiny crowds in some places where there are crowds, but it's not going to be like 80,000 people screaming in your helmet. So I wonder to what degree on that. It's an interesting point, and we're going to have to wait to see how it plays out. Do you have any thoughts on that one way or another?
Well, the gambling is going to be interesting, right? Like, it's usually about a 3-point penalty for being the road team in a game, at least Vegas, and then that has kind of dwindled as the years have gone on because you get more of a wine and cheese kind of crowd at a lot of these NFL games, especially in the seats closest to the field. And so now you're not going to have any fans in some stadiums, and as you mentioned, extremely limited in others. I have to think that it's not going to be that much of a penalty for being the road NFL team with the way that this kind of thing shakes out. And so if you're going to penalize your running back, let's say, because he's on the road against a tough opponent, and you're thinking, they'll be playing from behind the whole time, I don't want to play him. I wouldn't really have that thought process right now. I would be very comfortable and just take the best running back. Don't worry about, home, road, and that kind of thing. I know there's a factor into every decision that you're making on the fantasy roster. It could certainly be one of those tiebreakers when you're flipping the coin on Sunday at 12:30, trying to figure out which guy you're going to put in your flex position. But I would not be factoring in home road a whole lot at all. I mean, the only disadvantage going on the road is that you have to actually go on a plane the day before or 2 days before. But besides that, there's really not going to be any difference. I mean, you shouldn't be seeing false starts from road teams, right? I mean, offenses, they better have the snap count and wherever they want to have sex. You're just embarrassing yourself if you can be in a quiet, empty stadium and you're going false starts a couple of times in a row to begin a drive. So, I think, we kind of have to see exactly how it plays out, what the difference will be. But I got to think, there's just not going to be much difference between being home and road.
It's very unusual for anybody to consider any aspect of our present situation a plus. But if there's one guy out there that's bemoaning that we didn't have coronavirus last year, it's probably Freddie Kitchens, because he's gone, how many less penalties would we have had? I could have gotten away with having an undisciplined team if there wasn't for the crowds last year. So, yeah, that's an interesting point that you make there, because I watched what was probably the most undisciplined team in the league last year. So, yeah, the undisciplined teams are going to benefit probably a little bit unfairly from this, because they may not have as many crowd-induced mistakes.
You won't have your home crowd booing you,
Well, that's true. That too.
For some of these teams that are struggling in the second quarter of their first game, and it's not an uncommon sound at their home stadiums. That it'll be a little more positive, perhaps, for some of those situations.
That's true. That's true. And one of the interesting things to me as well here. One of the more underrated aspects, I think, of this season from a fantasy perspective is that folks who drafted and got good depth at tight end, if they went 3 or potentially 4 deep, there's a lot of guys out there that if you take a flyer on really, really have an upside. Whether it be the Iowa guys, Fant and Hawkinson, if you're looking for more from them, at this phase of their career. Rob Gronkowski is actually in that whole flyer pool based on taking a year off. You kind of don't know what you're going to get from him. Austin Hooper, a little bit of an upgrade going to a tight end heavy offense like Kevin Stefanski likes to run. Right down to Hayden Hurst, Evan Engram. There's a number of such names out there. Obviously, everybody's keying on Kelsey and Kittle, and to whatever extent Ertz, Andrews, maybe Waller. But if you get shut out there, the prospect of hitting on one, maybe two of these guys here who really could kind of burst out this year, that's something that could really help teams if they're really, especially if they're on the playoff bubble in their leagues.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Waller. I think that he's one of those guys that does check some of those boxes. Where, all right, you have the same head coach in place, you have the same quarterback in place, you have someone who was coming into his own over the course of last year. So if you didn't get one of the big two in Kittle or Kelsey, maybe you landed him. But I think, the tight end position, like a lot of others, you're going to see it kind of bob and weave along the way. I would look at Cincinnati, too. I mean, often rookie quarterbacks, they fall in love with their tight end. It's an easy target to check down to. So that could be a situation you check out and how exactly it's going to develop with Joe Burrow there in Cincinnati. But, I just think it's going to be chaotic no matter what the position is once you start getting past the bona fide.
Oh, absolutely. And in looking at that there, and interesting that you mentioned him because from having gone to the good old Harvard on the Hocking, Ohio University here, I'm a big Joe Burrow guy. I love the 7-4-0 like he does. And so notwithstanding the fact that I'm a Browns fan, I'll root for Joe Burrow anytime he's not playing the Browns. But that's an interesting situation because we were talking when we did our preseason segments here. Just looking at the NFL in a general kind of football sense, is a team like the Bengals, and like you said, a rookie quarterback, so it's hard to expect a whole lot. But if you look at the skill positions, one of the things that struck me here, I mean, it's very interesting, and I think a lot of it comes down to Paul Brown having founded the franchise when you look at the color scheme similarities between the Bengals and the Browns. But it almost seems ironic because to me, it's a slightly poor man's version of what the Browns have at the skill positions here, running back, wide receiver, tight end. The Bengals, to me, don't quite match up, but few teams in the league really would, so that what the Browns have as far as a collection there. But you start looking at Mixon and Green and Boyd and everybody that they've got there, and it's not too many steps slotted behind where I'd have the Browns crew, and that to me that's an incredible compliment.
And we'll see how much Joe Burrow misses Joe Brady and what really got LSU going and humming offensively, because Carolina's betting that it was as much the offensive coordinator as much as it was the quarterback. So, Carolina will be another interesting situation. And look, there's that team that's kind of the warning sign, right? New head coach, offensive coordinator, new quarterback in there. The one constant you have is a great one, and Christian McCaffrey. But, that would be one of those situations we're maybe a little nervous about with, having the limited time here. But obviously in Cincinnati, Bengals would love to see Burrow get off to a good start. And guy's got a big arm. You saw in college, he's accurate down the field. You're going to have to hit some tighter windows in the NFL, but he does have some guys that can fly out wide. So you would think, if that offensive line, give him a little bit of time, Burrow will have some opportunities for at least some big plays, even if it's not consistent all the way through as you might expect for a rookie.
Absolutely, and in a very, very deep sleeper sense, you'd be looking at John Ross on that roster as well. He's been a disappointment to this point in his career from a fantasy perspective, but never count out a guy with his raw skills. Having said that, the clock's ticking on him, so it might be now or never as far as him taking another step up. But just looking around the league here in a general sense, any other kind of thoughts from you as far as this season, things to expect, things that owners should prepare for?
I just think you're going to have to be flexible. Don't get married into some kind of strategy. Don't think now and say, okay, well, this is going to be how I plan out this year. Even though I'm saying be patient early, you better be flexible because things are going to change quickly, and you're going to have to adjust, and then they're going to change again at mid-season and probably again when you start thinking about the playoffs and how you want to set up your team then. So, I think you probably want to be careful falling in love and having, a really starts and does kind of roster where you're so dependent on one or two players because, guys are going to get knocked out. I just think that's going to be a big part of this season. So you better have either some backup plans or I think a deep team. I think that's kind of the way to go. And, really pay attention to, what the transaction limits in your league are, what your FAB budget is, and how you want to go about that if that's part of your league. Because, look, these leagues are often won or lost at the draft. It's not going to be the case this year. It's going to be won or lost with what you do from week one beyond, how you use the waiver wire. You're going to have starting players that, weren't even on these draft lists coming into the season by like week 10, week 12. I just think that's going to be a big part of it. So, take in what you watch early on this year and, be willing to be versatile and move around and have some different strategies over the course of the year because, we're all trying to guess what this league might look like, and you don't really know. We don't know until it starts to unfold.
Absolutely. No knowns and unknowns and all of that, as we said. And one of the things, too, when you're looking at real deep sleepers, and by the way, this is not somebody that I'm as high on as a lot of people are. I'm hearing a lot of smart marks out there that love Case Keenum this year because they seem certain that Baker Mayfield's going to be benched. I think that is a gigantic leap to be making at this point in time before they've even taken the field. But having said that, somebody who is familiar with the Kevin Stefanski playbook. So if you're looking at that, given that you might see quarterbacks going down, hopefully not from COVID or anything really severe, but the quarterbacks go down every day for other purposes as well. So if you're looking at guys who have maybe more of a familiarity with the playbook, those might be guys that when something happens, you're really going to want to jump on them because it's not going to be, in a year where the league is plagued with familiarity issues, those guys at least should be largely immune from that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. If you have a backup quarterback, and like you said in Cleveland, Baker Mayfield goes down, you better have a quarterback with experience and a quarterback that has some knowledge of the system walking in. Otherwise, even if it's a bigger name, would not be, really considering anyone else along those lines.
Right, and just one of the unique things in a unique season, and God willing, in 2021, everything will be back to normal for football, as is society, or at least significantly closer than we are today. Unfortunately, I think there's plenty of room to hope that could be the case based on how things are going. A lot of rough ground between here and there, but by this time next year, hopefully things are more like they were heading into the 2019 season, not just in football, but in society. We will all hope, but certainly, Pete McCarthy, a pleasure to have you on the show. Of course, great coverage from you at SiriusXM and WFAN. Look forward to catching up with you on fantasy sports on the show subsequently. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
Yeah, it was great, Rick. Really enjoyed it. And look, we all got to trudge through this year 2020, and we might as well end up with some fantasy trophies at the end of it, right? Some kind of saving grace.
Exactly. That's what I'm aiming for in my own right here, as we all are. We have this to look forward to. The season's getting underway. Appreciate you helping us kick it off. Thank you very much, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in to FDH Lounge, mini episode 1275.